It had been nearly a year since Ethan last saw his college friend, Liam. Their friendship had survived through distance and the occasional late-night message, but lately, Liam's tone had changed. His usual humor was replaced with brief replies, often ending with, "I've been busy, man." When he finally invited Ethan to spend a weekend at his house outside the city, Ethan didn't hesitate. He needed a break, and more than that, he wanted to understand what was really going on with his friend. The train ride to the countryside stretched through rolling fields and quiet towns. Ethan leaned against the window, thinking about the easy days they'd spent at university, nights of shared laughter and unspoken loyalty. Liam had always been the bright one, fearless and unpredictable. But in his recent photos, Ethan noticed something different in his eyes, a distant, unsettled look that felt out of place on his friend's usually confident face. When the taxi pulled into the driveway, Ethan's first impression was of silence. The house stood tall and elegant, with ivy creeping along the stone walls. The garden looked immaculate, too perfect, as if constantly inspected. Before he could knock, the front door opened. Sophie, Liam's mother, greeted him with a warm smile. "You must be Ethan. Liam's told me so much about you." Her voice carried genuine kindness. Ethan felt immediately at ease. Behind her, however, stood a man whose presence changed the air, Mark, Liam's stepfather. He extended his hand with a polite grin. "Welcome to our home," Mark said smoothly. His handshake was firm, his gaze steady, perhaps too steady. Ethan smiled back, but something about the man's calm confidence made him uneasy. There was no hostility, but there was a subtle kind of authority in the way he looked at people, like he was silently measuring them. Liam appeared a moment later, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Finally, you're here," he said, pulling Ethan into a quick hug. His tone was cheerful, but Ethan noticed the tension in his shoulders, the brief glance toward Mark before he led his friend upstairs. The guest room was neat and cozy, overlooking the backyard. "It's good to see you again," Liam said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Things have been different here." "Different how?" Ethan asked, but Liam only shrugged. "You'll see." He changed the topic quickly, asking about old classmates, their professors, the usual nostalgia that made them laugh again. For a while, it felt like old times. That evening, the family sat down for dinner. Sophie talked about her garden, and Mark asked Ethan about his work. Everything seemed polite, almost rehearsed. But every time Liam spoke, Mark's gaze lingered a little too long, not angry, not affectionate, but observant. Like a teacher evaluating a student. Ethan couldn't decide whether he was imagining it or if there really was something cold beneath that polite exterior. After dinner, the two friends went for a walk under the soft orange glow of the porch light. Liam was quieter than usual. "You ever feel like people only see the version of you they want to see?" he asked suddenly. Ethan looked at him curiously. "Yeah, sometimes." "But why?" Liam kicked at a pebble and smiled faintly. "Just thinking out loud." They sat on a bench in the garden, the night humming with crickets. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was the kind of silence that carries unspoken truths. Ethan sensed that Liam was trying to tell him something but didn't yet have the courage to say it. When they returned inside, Sophie had gone to bed. Mark was sitting in the living room, reading. As they passed, he looked up and said, "Liam, don't stay up too late. You know how early mornings are here." His tone sounded casual, but it carried a weight that made Liam stiffen. Ethan caught it, a flicker of discomfort in Liam's eyes, before his friend quickly nodded and led him upstairs. Later that night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies small sounds, the wind brushing against the window, the faint creak of floorboards. Then he heard muffled voices through the wall, Mark's low, firm tone and Liam's tense, defensive replies. He couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm of it told a story, a confrontation, quiet but sharp. After a few minutes, the voices stopped. Footsteps moved down the hall, then faded. Ethan lay still, his heart uneasy. Something about this house didn't feel right. Something about Liam's silence carried a history that hadn't yet been spoken. The next morning, Ethan found Liam sitting on the porch, staring at the garden. He sat beside him quietly, waiting for him to speak. After a long pause, Liam said softly, "There are things you don't know about me, Ethan. But maybe it's time you did." Ethan looked at him, the sunlight glinting across his friend's distant expression. Whatever truth Liam carried, Ethan knew it was heavy, and that this visit was about to change everything. The air that morning was still and heavy, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Ethan followed Liam into the kitchen where sunlight spilled across the tiled floor. Sophie was humming softly while making coffee, her warmth filling the room. She spoke to Liam with the gentle affection of a mother who believed everything in her home was peaceful. Ethan smiled politely, though he could feel Liam's stiffness beside him, a kind of silent restraint that no one else seemed to notice. When Mark entered, the atmosphere changed. His voice was calm, his smile courteous, but something about him bent the room's mood. "Morning, boys," he said, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder. Liam's reaction was subtle but visible, his shoulders tensed before he moved slightly away. Ethan caught the moment, small but loud in meaning. He realized now that the discomfort he'd sensed wasn't imagination. It was real, and it lived between every gesture, every forced smile. After breakfast, Sophie went out to tend her garden. Mark disappeared into his study, leaving Ethan and Liam alone in the living room. For a while, neither spoke. Liam pretended to scroll through his phone, avoiding eye contact. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Liam, what happened last night?" he asked quietly. Liam froze. His fingers tightened around the phone before he set it aside. "You heard us?" "Only voices," Ethan admitted. "But I could tell something's wrong. You can trust me." For a moment, Liam said nothing. His face shifted through hesitation, shame, and exhaustion before settling on quiet honesty. "He isn't who he seems," he began softly. "Mark acts kind in front of people, but when we're alone, it's different. He uses his words like weapons. Makes me feel small, dependent, guilty for things I never did." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and calm. "That's not normal, Liam. That's manipulation." Liam gave a bitter smile. "It's more than that. He tells me he loves me, not as a father, not even as family, but in ways that blur everything. At first, I thought he was just being protective. Then it became confusing, like I was trapped in something I couldn't name." The confession hung between them, fragile but powerful. Ethan didn't interrupt. He could see the weight in Liam's expression, years of fear, doubt, and misplaced guilt. "I tried to tell Mom once," Liam continued, his voice trembling. "But he convinced her I was overreacting, that I was emotional and dramatic. She believed him. And after that, I stopped trying." Ethan felt anger rising inside him, not just toward Mark but toward the silence that had allowed this to continue. "You don't deserve that," he said firmly. "He's supposed to protect you, not control you." Liam looked at him, eyes glassy but defiant. "I kept thinking maybe I was the problem, that I'd misunderstood. But it's been years, Ethan. Every time I try to leave, he finds a way to pull me back. Guilt, pity, threats, he knows how to twist everything." There was a pause, the kind that carries too much meaning to be filled with words. Outside, the sound of Sophie's laughter drifted faintly through the open window. Painfully unaware, Ethan finally spoke. "You're not alone in this anymore. Whatever's happened, it ends now." Liam's eyes met his. "You don't understand, Ethan. If I say something, it'll destroy her, my mom. She's built her life around him. She wouldn't believe it." Ethan took a breath, steady but resolute. "Maybe she doesn't have to believe it right now. What matters is that you believe yourself." For the first time, Liam didn't look away. The quiet bravery returning to his gaze made Ethan realize that this was the first step, the moment where truth began replacing fear. That night, they sat outside again under the dim light of the garden lamp. The air smelled of wet grass and distant rain. Liam spoke freely now, his words trembling but steady. I used to think love meant giving up pieces of yourself for someone else's comfort. But that's not love, is it? No, Ethan said softly. Love doesn't take, it gives. What you've experienced isn't love. It's control disguised as care. Liam nodded slowly, the truth settling into him like a long-awaited breath. Before they went inside, Liam looked up at the stars and said, almost to himself, I don't know what comes next. But I think I'm ready to stop pretending. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Then that's where it begins. As they returned to the house, the light in Mark's study flickered. Through the glass door, Ethan saw Mark watching them, his expression unreadable, his smile faint and sharp. The storm was coming, and Ethan knew the next day would change everything. Morning came quietly, like it was afraid to disturb the silence left behind. The smell of burnt coffee filled the kitchen when I walked in. Ryan stood by the counter, his back turned, shoulders tense beneath his gray hoodie. He didn't look up when I said his name. The air between us felt sharp, heavy with everything unspoken from the night before. You and Liam, he said finally, his voice low but edged. What was that? I froze. There was no good answer, only truths that would hurt either way. It wasn't what you think, I said carefully. We were just talking. Ryan turned then, his eyes full of disbelief. Talking? Ethan, I saw you. The way you looked at him, you think I wouldn't notice? His words cut like glass. He's my friend. My best friend. I wanted to defend myself, but all I could say was, I didn't mean for anything to happen. That made him laugh bitterly. You never do. He grabbed his keys from the counter and left before I could speak again, the door slamming so hard it shook the walls. Outside, the sound of the engine faded into the forest. I sank into a chair, staring at the half-empty coffee pot. Guilt gnawed at me, but underneath it, a strange calm lingered, a quiet awareness that, for once, I hadn't lied to myself. A few minutes later, Liam walked in, his hair still damp from the morning air. He's gone, isn't he? He asked softly. I nodded. He thinks I couldn't even finish the sentence. Liam's face tightened with regret. I never wanted this to happen. Not like this. I looked up at him, searching his eyes for something certain, something solid. Then what did you want? He hesitated, then said, to be honest. For once in my life. His voice trembled, stripped of its usual calm. When I'm around you, I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. That's all I meant last night. I believed him. But believing didn't make it easier. Ryan's never going to understand that, I whispered. I know, Liam said. And maybe he doesn't have to. Maybe this trip wasn't about him at all. There was nothing left to say. By noon, Noah packed his things without asking questions. Emily stayed silent, avoiding eye contact with Ryan when he returned later that day. The group that had arrived together only days ago now felt like strangers trapped in the same story, waiting for it to end. The ride home was silent. The road stretched endlessly, each mile pushing us farther from the mountains, from the version of ourselves that had existed there. Ryan drove with both hands gripping the wheel, his jaw set. I sat in the back beside Liam, though neither of us said a word. The tension was unbearable, an invisible wall between every seat. When we finally reached the city, Ryan didn't wait for goodbyes. He dropped me off at my apartment, barely glancing my way. Take care of yourself, he said flatly, before driving off. That night, I sat by the window, watching headlights fade along the street. I wanted to call him, to explain, to make him see that it wasn't betrayal, it was truth trying to surface after years of hiding. But some truths can't be softened. They have to hurt before they heal. Days turned into weeks. Ryan didn't answer my messages, and I didn't blame him. Then, one evening, I got a text from Liam. It was short, almost hesitant. I'm moving. Needed a fresh start. I hope you find peace, Ethan. You deserve it. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet thank you, to him, to myself, to the silence that had followed me home. Months later, Ryan showed up at my door. He looked tired, older somehow. We stood there for a long moment before he said, "I shouldn't have yelled at you." "You had every right to," I replied. That he shook his head. "Maybe. But I was angry because I didn't understand. And maybe I still don't. But you're my brother, Ethan. That hasn't changed." Something in me broke then, in the best way. We didn't fix everything that day, but forgiveness began quietly, like the first light after a long storm. As he left, Ryan paused by the door. "You know," he said, "Liam asked me to tell you he's doing okay. He said you helped him be honest with himself." After he was gone, I sat by the window again, the city lights glowing faintly below. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. That trip hadn't destroyed me, it had revealed me. Sometimes, the people who break the silence in your life aren't meant to stay forever. They're there to show you who you really are, and for that, I'll always be grateful.